And health officials are speaking.
With only 2 new cases, so that is an outstanding result, and I want to thank our citizens for coming forward. Please maintain this vigilance. No matter what restrictions we ease, none of it will work if we get complacent. None of it will work unless we keep our social distancing when we're out and about, and unless we come forward and get tested, even if we have the mildest of symptoms. Even a scratchy throat, an ache or a pain, any flu-like symptom should be treated as though you've got the virus, so please make sure you get tested. And if you notice on our heat map that there's a sudden surge in cases in your community, please make sure, if you feel you're vulnerable or you work with a lot of people or you've been in contact with anybody who's been diagnosed as having the virus, that you come forward and get tested. Our testing facilities, the testing opportunities are getting better by the day, and we're able to cope with at least 10,000 tests a day. In fact, just 48 hours ago, when we had over 13,000 tests in a 24-hour period, I was blown away by how vigilant the community was, and extremely pleased, because we know as the colder months come on board, flu-like symptoms are likely to increase. Don't assume it's the flu, assume it's the virus. And every time you're out of your home, assume it's the virus. Now, as has been foreshadowed, in the last couple of days in particular, and in the last few weeks, New South Wales has been considering, on the basis of our health advice, further restrictions that we can ease. And today I'm pleased to announce that from next Friday, there will be a further easing of restrictions. And before I go through them in detail, I want to say to the people of New South Wales, we're at this point in the pandemic because everybody has pulled together and done the right thing. And we have to keep our vigilance. Every time you leave the house, you have to assume you have the virus or somebody you're going in contact with has the virus. That is the only way we will keep this deadly virus at bay. Just because we're easing restrictions doesn't mean the virus is less deadly or at less threat. All it means is that we've done well to date, and we have to keep our vigilance. I can't stress that enough. It concerns me when I see images of people not maintaining social distance. Every retailer, every customer, every person out and about has to have responsibility in maintaining social distancing, because all the ground we've gained will be lost if people get too complacent. They assume it's business as usual, which it's not. We will never be business as usual. We will never have normal lives until the pandemic is over. I can't stress that enough. So we do the easing of restrictions with caution, and because we've demonstrated collectively our ability to listen to the restrictions, to respect them, and that's why I'm pleased asking everybody to show that same vigilance as we move forward. So from next Friday in New South Wales, we will be able to have outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people. For the first time since our lockdown, what this means is that you can leave the home for recreational purposes. So a gathering of up to 10 people might be a physical training session, it might be sitting down in a park, it might be having some type of gathering outdoors, but please make sure, even when you're with close friends or relatives that don't live with you in the same household, you maintain social distancing. So just because you catch up with very close friends doesn't mean you shouldn't maintain social distancing. Quite the opposite. The last thing we want is to pass on the virus to those we care about the most. So even if you're sitting in a park, even if you're hanging around or doing an outdoor gym session with your colleagues or with your friends, make sure you maintain that social distancing, because otherwise people you care about the most will get the virus, and you don't want to live with that guilt. We're also, given the outdoor gatherings number is going up to 10, allowing cafes and restaurants to also have 10 patrons at a time. But I do want to stress and make this point. We know that for a lot of cafes and restaurants, this still doesn't mean they're viable, because for many cafes and restaurants, they won't think that up to 10 patrons is viable for them. But for those that do feel it's viable, please make sure you maintain social distancing. If it's a very small hole in the wall, you won't be able to have 10 people, because you need to keep the 4 square metre rule. You need to have that social distancing. So if you're a small hole in the wall, you might have 2 people inside, and if you're allowed, you might have 8 people outside at any one sitting. The combination of people is up to you as the manager of the business. But also you can have multiple sittings, so long as in between all those sittings you clean the equipment and make sure your patrons are safe. And patrons themselves need to make sure that they don't break or make sure they maintain social distancing. We'll now be able to welcome up to 5 visitors to a household. Previously in New South Wales we'd limited it to 2 adults. Now you can have up to 5 people come and visit a household at the one time. The combination is up to you, but the 5 people I want to stress includes children. So it can be 5 adults or 2 adults and 3 children. The combination is up to you, but a total of 5 people, irrespective of the ages and stages of those people, is there in place. We've increased the number of people at a wedding to 10. And of course, also for funerals, if it's an indoor funeral, 20 mourners, or if it's an outdoor funeral, up to 30 mourners will be allowed from Friday, as will religious gatherings or places of worship can have up to 10 people. The place of worship might choose to have quiet prayer with 10 people at a time, or formal services, but no more than 10 people at a time. And there is an expectation that both the people attending those places as well as the people organising the services or the place of worship maintain hygiene and good social distancing for everybody in those places. We've allowed for outdoor equipment to be used, but with caution. And I want to stress this. Please acknowledge and assume that every time you use an outdoor piece of gym equipment or an outdoor playground, the person who's used it before you may have the virus. So we recommend wiping it down, using your own discretion, and councils may take up the opportunity to have extra provisions. But those of us who are extra cautious might continue to choose not to use any outdoor equipment. We're not disallowing it because the health advice says so long as there's hygiene maintained, you can use the equipment, but we ask you to exercise it with caution and make decisions for yourself and your family as to whether you feel that equipment can be used. And the federal and state health experts have also given us advice about outdoor pools, outdoor swimming areas and the rules around those. So we're allowing that to occur in New South Wales from Friday, but with the restrictions that the health authorities have put in place. So I say to all of our citizens, thank you for your efforts so far. To have a population the size of New South Wales, to see our cases go from a maximum of 200 or so a day down to just a small handful is a wonderful achievement. And we don't want to see any of this lost. We do need to fire up our economy. We do need to get people back into jobs. We need to see some semblance of normality come back. But we can't breach any of the restrictions in place. No matter what you are doing when you leave your home, you need to maintain social distancing. And this doesn't change the fact that so many in our community who are very vulnerable, those of a certain age or those with an underlying medical condition, should still exercise the extreme caution they've already been exercising for the last month and a half. So please acknowledge that the easing of these restrictions is a sign about how far we've come. But please also acknowledge that all of us need to maintain our vigilance. Walk out the door assuming you have the virus or somebody else you're coming into contact does. So social distancing, good hygiene, washing hands before and after you do anything is so critical, and we ask everybody to do that. Now, please also acknowledge that New South Wales, whilst considering the advice from the National Cabinet and considering what National Cabinet endorsed, every state has to move it at its own pace. And we will continue to monitor the data. We also have schools starting back tomorrow. So we will continue to monitor the data about what, if anything, can occur in the future. We'll continue to monitor the data on the impact of this easing of restrictions is having from Friday. So I can't give you a commitment beyond what I've announced today as to what will happen when, because we need to make sure we analyse the data, and we'll need to make sure our citizens have the chance to absorb the decisions we've taken and then plan accordingly. The reason why we're not implementing any of these easing until Friday is to make sure we give our citizens time to absorb what this new chapter in managing the pandemic means, and it also gives our health minister and the police time to change all the orders so that we have everything in place by Friday. And of course it also gives time for businesses to consider what opportunities this means for them. So I can't thank the citizens of New South Wales enough. New South Wales Government on your behalf will maintain our no regrets policy, and will also ensure that we acknowledge that New South Wales is the largest population of all the states. Sydney is the most densely populated city, and we need to make sure decisions we take from here on in continue to acknowledge the number of cases we have compared to other states, but also the specific demographics that are here in New South Wales. I'll now ask Dr Chant to give her daily medical update, and then Minister of Health, I'm sure, would like to say a few words as well.
So as the Premier indicated, we had 2 new cases from 9,515 people tested in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. on the 9th of May. We've now got 3,053 confirmed cases in New South Wales, and there's approximately 105 COVID cases being treated by New South Wales Health, and we have 7 people being treated on ventilators in our intensive care units across the state. Of those 2 new cases, one was in an overseas traveller returning from the UK, and the other was an attendee of the outpatient unit I referenced earlier in the week, where we had a case, and through contact tracing we've identified a contact of that case that has acquired the illness. I would like to just echo the Premier's words that whilst we open up and ease restrictions, it's essential that we continue to have the community come forward for testing. I urge you today, often we see a decline over the weekend in test numbers, and if anyone has the most minimal of symptoms, please come forward to testing. This is going to be an important assurance element that we are not missing transmission clusters in the community. And I would just like to highlight that why this is essential is that in certain settings we can see this virus spread quite rapidly, and it's important that we break those trains of transmission, and you as a community member have a key role to play in that. I'd like to acknowledge the work that has gone into by the community in allowing us to be in this position to ease the restriction, and also acknowledge the hard work of the health staff who are undertaking the testing, and also the public health staff who have been doing such good work with the public health contact tracing. Thank you.
Look, as we move forward and try and bring back a degree of normality into our lives, each of us should remember that we were vulnerable to this virus in January, and we are vulnerable to this virus now. We don't have a vaccine, we don't have herd immunity. In other words, we don't have a large group through the population who've actually had this virus and are now immune. So we are, each and every one of us, still very much at risk. But what we do know is very different from January is that our community have actually embraced an understanding about this virus, and they understand, we all understand just how dangerous it is and how important social distancing is to keep us safe. As Health Minister, I want to keep, and I think all of us in our government and our community want to keep each and every one of us safe. But we also have to recognise that there are other issues. There are issues around our economy, issues that impact on our mental health, issues that just impact on our overall way of life. So what the Premier is doing today is making announcements which are going to give a degree of normality back, but that normality could be quickly lost if people do not adhere, if our community does not adhere to the message of the importance of continued social distancing. We are still vulnerable. We still need vigilance, and we must maintain that social distancing. So my essential message to all of us here in New South Wales, all 8 million of us, is yes, we are going to have that normality back to some degree, but we also have exactly the same risk as we've always had. There is no vaccine available, and we must be vigilant. Thank you.
Premier, what has changed since Friday and all of last week when you were indicating that there would be no further easing of restrictions to today? And is it a case that it was just impractical to keep restrictions in place given that Scott Morrison has announced on Friday that the 3-stage plan to recovery?
Look, I wanted to make very clear last week that there would be no changes this week on Mother's Day. I was specifically asked what would happen on Mother's Day, and I wanted to make very clear that everybody had to stick to the existing restrictions. But I have to also note that New South Wales Government will continue to rely heavily on the data and on the advice we get. And it won't surprise you all to know that the last few weeks has exceeded our expectation in terms of the number of people that have come forward for testing and the relatively low number of cases. But I do also want to stress this point, and I do so echoing what the Prime Minister said last week. We have to assume there'll be breakouts. We'll have to assume there'll be a spike in cases in particular locations. But what we've done in New South Wales is to make sure that if and when that occurs, that we have the ability to isolate those cases and to deal with them. And that's why I'm incredibly proud that we're the only state or only level of government in Australia that has that real-time heat map, which shows by postcode the number of cases, the number of tests, and the number of people who have the virus in an active way in a locality. And we ask people to be vigilant, to see what's happening in their own community, to come forward and get tested. And some of the things we'd introduced in New South Wales prior to National Cabinet endorsing, because, for example, when it came to auctions or when it came to other parts of industry, where the health advice says to us in New South Wales it's a low health risk and it matches the data that we're getting, we can move forward. But I also want to stress that unlike other states, New South Wales is not yet ready to have recreational holidays in regional communities. We're not yet ready to ease restrictions as much as other states have. But what we will do is assure the community that so long as we keep working together, so long as we keep working hard, that we can continue to move forward. And there is a risk, given the size of our population and the number of cases, that we may need to go backwards sometimes. I hope that's not the case. We continue to take a cautious approach in New South Wales, but also one which has a focus on jobs and the economy, because we can't continue to live like this for the next year or until there's a vaccine. But what we can do is continue to bring the community along with us, and I can't tell you how grateful I am as to the level of cooperation, the respecting of the restrictions, and we ask for that to continue. So we wanted to also make sure that we give people the best part of the next week to consider what the easing of restrictions means for them, what it means for their loved ones and what it means for their own activity, a chance for businesses to consider what it means for them. But can I please stress, if you're a retailer or a customer, please make sure you keep the social distancing and the hygiene in place. We don't want to see all the good work we've done go backwards. And I want to foreshadow that whilst New South Wales continues to move forward, we are doing a lot of work behind the scenes to look at what can come next and when. But that will again depend on the data. We're very keen to see the impact of what extra movement will have on when schools go back, obviously with the increased retail, and of course with the easing of restrictions next Friday. And the data, the number of cases, and to the extent that we have spikes and where they are, will determine the next steps forward. And I please ask all of our citizens to consider that whilst other states might move differently, we are doing every decision we undertake is for the benefit of New South Wales. And for example, except for Victoria, every other state has closed its borders. We haven't closed our borders. There are things we've done which are very different, because when we actually started to put in the restrictions, our first thought was, what does the way out of these restrictions look like? And that's why we've been very considered in the way we do that.
So, sorry, Premier, what's changed? Has there been new health advice that you received yesterday leading to this decision? And why do you now not have to look at the data from May's easing of restrictions before further easing restrictions, like you said last week?
Can I say also that the number of restrictions that we're easing from Friday, we'd already started drafting, we'd already started doing the work for that. So this was already in our plans, because these restrictions, in fact, the Health Minister had already started drafting orders in relation to the number of people that could be at gatherings. So this work was already in place in New South Wales, and we'd always envisaged that would be able to do it. But I also want to stress that the number of cases and the number of tests that we've conducted in the last week to 10 days has also given us confidence to move forward in this regard. But in some ways, we'd exceeded what other states have done. In some ways, we're moving a bit more slowly, especially when it comes to regional tourism. And I say to everybody, you still cannot take a holiday in New South Wales. However, you can go outdoors now for recreational purposes, which is a big shift. So until this point in time, our advice had been stay home unless you have one of the 4 categories to go out. And now very much our message is stay safe. When you leave the front door, make sure no matter what you do, you think about social distancing, you think about hygiene, and you think about those closest to you.
Are you confident these easing of restrictions are permanent? And if not, what will it take to go backwards?
These restrictions will only be the easing of restrictions will only be permanent if all of us take on responsibility to respect the new set of rules we've put in place. I hope to think they'll be permanent. I don't want us to go backwards, but that depends on all of us. So be vigilant. If you go into a shop front and the retailer isn't doing what they're supposed to, let them know, let the authorities know. Please make sure all of us stay vigilant. At the end of the day, governments can put in all the rules in place, but it's up to all of us to do the right thing as well.
Moving around Sydney yesterday, you could be forgiven for getting the impression that a lot of Sydney had already moved to stage 1, almost stage 2, to shopping centres were just heaving with people. Are you concerned people are moving ahead without taking your advice?
There's no doubt, as big as the threat of the virus, the biggest threat to the New South Wales community is complacency. The virus is as deadly, it's as contagious, it's as virulent as it's always been. The only difference between May and March is the fact that we have far less cases in May. We need to keep it that way. That is the only difference. But unfortunately, the virus is very contagious. We're heading into colder months, and that's why it's so important for all of us not to be complacent. The second we let our guard down, the virus will start winning again. And I can't stress that enough. The second any of us get too complacent means the virus will start winning again. At the moment, the people of New South Wales are winning. We don't want to change that balance, but it does worry me when I move around and I see the vast majority of people doing the right thing. But when you look at gatherings, and the health advice is very clear on this, the biggest threat to contagions or to having the virus move from person to person is in large gatherings. Avoid large gatherings. Avoid places where there's lots of other people. You should not be in contact with too many people at the one time. And make sure that if you happen to be in a shopping mall or a retail outlet, that you wait outside, you maintain social distancing. There is no point letting go of all the hard work we've done to see the virus start winning again. At the moment, the people of New South Wales are winning. We don't want that to change, and it does concern me when I see images of people getting too complacent. Please do not be complacent. We don't want to have to move backwards, because many countries who've successfully beat the virus are now moving backwards. South Korea is a classic example. Singapore is another example. These countries were highlighted as doing really well with the virus, and in recent weeks they've had to roll back and move back into lockdown. We don't want that to happen in New South Wales. We want us to keep moving forward, and that's why I ask everybody, please don't be complacent. Complacency is our enemy, just as the virus is.
Premier, just in terms of cafes and restaurants, obviously there will now be up to 10 patrons allowed. A lot of cafes and restaurants are saying, well, what's the point? You know, that might not achieve the desired result of rebooting the economy. What do you say to that?
Oh, look, I completely agree with that notion. I think there'll only be a small proportion of restaurants and cafes that will find it viable to have up to 10 people, but it's a start. And it's up to those restaurants to determine whether or not they think they're viable. But I also want the community to know that the New South Wales Government, through senior members of my team, are already in touch with industry to work on plans about how industries can get back up and running. So please note that if you're a cafe or restaurant manager who doesn't feel that it's viable for you to reopen your sit-down facilities or eating facilities with these numbers, that we want to work with you on a path forward that maintains the safety of our patrons but also allows you to consider reopening your doors. But it's a start, and we acknowledge that for many restaurants and cafes, this won't be enough for them to have people, to welcome people inside their facilities. But having said that, I've also been quite inspired by seeing how a lot of businesses have reshaped the way they do things. So some cafes and restaurants might have sittings at small intervals, half or 1 hour sittings, and have multiple groups of 10 at different times of the day. And that's up to the restaurant or the cafe to consider what flexibility they have, but so long as at any one time there is no more than 10 people eating in, and so long as everybody eating in has social distancing. Again, for some very small outlets, it might only mean 2 or 3 people inside, because in addition to the maximum number of people, you also always have to maintain social distancing, the 1.5 metre distance between people, and essentially the 4 square metre rule, because the health experts keep stressing to us that large gatherings, especially indoors, is how the virus becomes the most contagious. And that's why indoors, especially indoors, if you don't maintain social distancing, you need to maintain it outdoors as well, but especially indoors when there's large numbers of people, and in the pandemic, up to 10 is a large number of people. You need to maintain that social distancing. You have to assume you have the virus, or someone else eating at that restaurant does as well, because until you develop symptoms, you could still be carrying the virus and spreading the virus.
I mean, with schools going back tomorrow, there's going to be more movement, more parents freed up to go back to work. Why not wait for the impact of that measure before introducing the new ones?
Look, New South Wales' easing of restrictions is quite modest when you look at the opportunities we have at this stage. And this week there will be increased activity, no doubt, with schools going back. But we also appreciate that when schools go back, it also signals certain things to the community about how we're feeling about addressing the pandemic at this stage. So we feel it's entirely appropriate to move to this next level of easing of restrictions. And of course, we know that when parents are dropping off and picking up children from school, or when they're getting their children to school, there could be several of them doing that at the same time. But make sure you maintain that social distancing. We're basing what we've done on the health advice. We're also basing it on the data we've collected in New South Wales. And can I assure you, our government would not be moving forward at this stage unless we thought it was absolutely safe to do so. But we also acknowledge that we have a responsibility to move forward at an appropriate, balanced way. But when you look at the number of people who've come forward and got tested and the number of cases, I feel that what we're doing at this time is entirely appropriate and consistent with what we've been already working on. As I said, we'd already planned, especially around gatherings at places of worship and weddings and other type of gatherings. We'd already done the work. It's already in place. And please also remember that this advice to government about 5 people indoors and 10 people outdoors was presented to National Cabinet more than a month ago. So it's not new. But what we've done in New South Wales is assess the appropriate time in which it would be for us to move forward.
But Premier, last week you were quite clear in terms of schools going back, we'll look at that data, then we'll look at the next thing. But now all of a sudden come Friday, there's heaps of stuff that's going to happen, and you said that you didn't want that to happen last week because you couldn't then understand where the spikes were happening. So can you just explain what is the change?
Certainly, because the health advice repeatedly says the biggest threat to spreading the virus is the large gatherings, but also the modality, how you get to and from somewhere. And given the response of the community in relation to easing restrictions, given the number of people that have come forward and got tested, and given the number of small cases we found, and given the work we've already done, we found it entirely appropriate to move at this time. But I want to say this to the community. If there is evidence or if there is data that shows either a huge spike, then we'll have to go backwards. But similarly, if the data shows us that we're doing better than expected, we can move forward a bit faster. That's why I don't want to go beyond what we've already said today, because it is a bit of watching and acting. And I don't want to provide any more information beyond what we have today, because it will be dependent on how the next few weeks goes. Of course it will.
Premier, you said that you didn't want to go further than what you'd already eased until you got the data. That was last week. Now you're going further again. Is it a case that New South Wales effectively needed to announce new restrictions because people were confused by what Scott Morrison had announced, thinking that it applied to us in this state?
No, I think it's a combination of facts. Firstly, that the fact that the community has come forward and that we've been doing so well, plus because we'd already done the work behind the scenes and what the likely effect of these easing would be. And please remember, there are a number of things we've still held back on. You cannot take a holiday in New South Wales. There are certain activities other states are doing which you can't yet do in New South Wales. But we have an obligation to our citizens to move forward or backwards as we see fit based on the health advice. And I say to all of our citizens, please continue to work with us. If you hear other states doing something different, that's okay, because they don't have our population, they don't have our density, they don't have the type of economic structures that we have. And these are all the things our government needs to consider. But please note, if anything, our government has to date had a no regrets policy in being cautious, and we wouldn't be moving forward unless we thought the health advice verified that. And I might ask Dr Chant to make a few more comments about this, given she and I and various senior colleagues, including the Minister for Health, are in daily contact about the data, what it means for our citizens, the homework we need to do and how we can keep moving forward.
I suppose to just clarify, in relation to some of the work that the Premier has indicated, for instance, in relation to funerals, we have had an exemption process in place. And what we've learned through that is that we've issued many exemptions up into that 15 level. and in some cases larger. We've also recognised that outdoor gatherings present much less risk than indoor, hence the moving to 20 and the outdoor funerals at 30. We're also very pleased that working with the funeral directors, they actually have got good plans for social distancing. And so a lot of the work that underpins our confidence in moving to these new levels is that work that's been actually going on for many weeks, probably not visible to you. In relation to the religious gatherings and places of worship, that really just brings into line the issue around the fact that weddings and funerals, and recognising that religious ceremonies are important for the well-being and mental health of the community. And again, 10 in a large church or a large venue with that social distancing in place, again, is assessed as a small risk, particularly when we're allowing outdoor gatherings of 10 people. The up to 5 visitors in the house at any one time, that builds on an announcement last week, which was really 2 adults and dependent children. And so again, really the 5, whilst it's very important symbolically and it allows people to choose friends and others over dependent children, it does not lead to actually a large-scale change to the household gathering restrictions. The outdoor gatherings of 10 people is consistent with the AHPCC advice, which was put to National Cabinet. And so, again, a very modest increase in outdoor gatherings. But as the Premier said, it's essential that this goes with hand hygiene, not going out if you've got minimal symptoms, and the social distancing measures. The return to cafe and restaurants to seat 10 patrons at a time, again, is a small step forward. And again, that will require them to have hand hygiene, the 4 metres squared, and encouraging people to have that 1.5 metres social distancing. So whilst there are a suite of new changes, they are proportionate and moderate. Schools have been going back, and I think we've been reviewing the data that shows that attendance at school in many areas has been even ahead of what was predicted. So we have that data. But in terms of workplaces, we will be saying to workplaces, where it works for you to work and your employer to work from home, we are urging you to continue to work from home at this point as we just move forward slowly and cautiously. These restrictions will be lifted later in the week, and again, it's giving business adequate time to put into all those safeguards, and for the community themselves to think about what their expectations of these settings would be. So as I said, a lot of work in the past has been done. These actually, whilst clumped together, sound a large suite. They're actually very incremental and reflect work that's been going on by the ministry to support the government.
Premier, in the interest of getting the economy moving forward, are you attracted to the 24-hour city plan that the Chamber of Business is putting forward?
Oh, look, obviously that plan has little relevance during a pandemic, but obviously as we get out of the pandemic there are those issues to consider. But I will say this, of course, our decision on easing restrictions does also have an eye on jobs and the economy, and anything we can do to get jobs going is very critical at this time, because we know that not only are families going through the stress of having to deal with the virus, but some families are really struggling with the economic consequences. And that's why for us it's critical to consider those impacts as well as obviously the health impacts. We seem to have addressed the health impacts, and now it's time for us to consider how we can get the economy going again.
Yeah, just Queensland is demanding that its NRL players get a flu shot. Is that something you'd like to see here?
Well, that really depends on the health experts. The health experts have accepted the plan put to them, and we expect all organisations who've had a health plan ticked off to stick to that plan. I don't care who the organisation is, I don't care who the individuals are. If you've signed off on a plan, you have to stick to that plan, because all of us have changed our lives, all of us have heeded to the restrictions that we've put in place, and it's important that if you have a plan ticked off, no matter who you are, what organisation you are, you have to stick to that plan.
Can I just clarify just the 10 people and the 5 people, that it's all inclusive of children, unlike the 2
It is. So to Dr. Chant's points, when you really break down each of the restrictions we've eased, it's not very different from what we have now. It's simply an incremental change. However, in order to provide that little bit of flexibility, rather than saying it has to be only 2 adults and dependent children, which in essence could be unlimited number of children, we've now said it's up to the individual, it's up to the household to determine the combination of 5.
So is that for cafes? Does that include the 10 patrons at cafes? So
Yeah. That inclusive, the 10 people at a cafe or restaurant is inclusive of children.
Just on this 5 people visiting rules. Effectively, that means that if a family of 2 adults and 4 kids want to go and visit their mum next week, for example, if they wanted to go and visit their mum today, they could. 2 adults, 4 kids.
Yep.
But next week,
Yep.
they need to leave 1 at home.
Yep.
So you've further restricted.
Well, what we've done is provide that greater level of flexibility, and on average, if you really look at people's personal circumstances, I think they would rather have the flexibility of having that discretion over the combination of people that visit a household. And again, this is all based on health advice. When we provided the advice about the 2 adults and dependent children, we did it on the basis of a household generally and the average number of children that are there. But please know, dealing with a pandemic is never an exact science. Dealing with a pandemic means trying to keep things as simple as possible and as consistent as possible. And so in New South Wales, when we looked initially at the 2 adults and the dependent children, it was consistent with our outdoor gathering number. And now what we've done is make sure we're consistent with the National Cabinet recommendation. And that's important. Keeping things as simple and as consistent as possible where we can helps our community understand what's happening moving forward. And so this provides, the 5-person indoor actually provides greater flexibility. And all of us have had to ease things anyway. No one's doing anything how we'd normally do it. Every time we leave the house, we have to plan, we have to think ahead. But that's what happens in a pandemic. These aren't normal circumstances, and I don't apologise for making sure that we keep things as simple as possible, as consistent as possible. And I stress, this isn't a perfect science. And even moving forward, we're going to see a spike in cases, we're going to see outbreaks, we're going to see people doing the wrong thing, unfortunately. But that's why all of us have to stay vigilant. And all of us have to make sure that we take care of those closest to us by doing the right thing.
Last question, please. On schools going back, there'll be some parents that still don't feel comfortable sending their kids back. Will there be any penalties for parents or students who choose to keep their kids at home?
Well, look, obviously, schools, the best health advice is that schools are a safe environment. We are recommending face-to-face, obviously, education resume from tomorrow, and eventually in the next few weeks you'll see full-time face-to-face education commence. It's never been compulsory to force parents to do one thing or another, and we've been very clear about that in New South Wales. But our strong recommendation is that face-to-face teaching needs to start. We want to get to full-time face-to-face teaching as soon as we can, and the best health advice is that schools are a safe environment. And of course, where adults are concerned, which is the main concern, where adults are concerned, we need to exercise good social distancing, whether it's in a teacher's staff room or whether it's in a drop-off point where parents are dropping and picking children.